Welcome to the Living Room Disciple Podcast. I can't wait to introduce you all to our guest today, Frank Liu. He graduated back in '97 with his degree in counseling from the University of Florida and then immediately became a pastor. Currently, he's pastoring Awaken Church in Jacksonville, Florida. And it's this intersection of ministry and counseling, ministry and mental health. It's the reason I asked Frank to join us today, because we're going to navigate the conversation, me and him, about how should the church really be engaging with the mental health conversation in our culture today. It's an area in which I've been confused and I've been struggling, and Frank has been an absolute blessing to me, helping to bring some light to this conversation. So I can't wait for you all to meet Frank. He's got an amazing wife, 4 wonderful kids, and an amazing story to go with it all. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Living Room Disciple Podcast, where discipleship finds a home. Frank, thank you so much for being on the Living Room Disciple.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here, Phil. Thanks for inviting me.
So this is a conversation that I've been trepidatious to have, but also eager. Like I have so many questions and so many thoughts. And so we have a mutual friend who indicated that I should talk to this guy who's been in pastoral ministry for a long time and has education in the areas of counseling, and you've kind of seen these two worlds come to be. I just couldn't be any more excited.
Yeah.
And so here's kind of like, let me frame our conversation just a little bit and then kind of put the ball in your court.
Sure.
So mental health, I think it's pretty reasonable to say, is kind of on the forefront of a lot of people's minds in the culture. It's moved even from an academic conversation and even from like a public awareness conversation to a popular culture conversation. I think many influencers, I don't feel like anybody releases an album nowadays in which they don't talk about their depression or anxiety. And I'm not trying to make light of it, but I'm also trying to comment that this is a cultural movement. And that's inside and outside the church. I don't think I've heard a recent Christian album that hasn't wrestled with feelings of anxiety and depression as well, right? So I guess my question to you is, from your vantage point and from the community that you're operating in, how do you believe the church should be thinking about and engaging in the mental health conversation today?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I appreciate your observation, because I do think it's very true. When I started off in the field in '97, there's our terminology was professional, and now it's become common, words like even terms OCD and PTSD, and just even things that they're just like, depression, anxiety have just become common terms with the assumption that we all understand what they mean, and we just use it commonplace. And it's just really a fascinating shift to see. And for me, I appreciate your question. I would say, man, I would love for the church the beginning point, just to engage. I think it's really important, and not to feel like thinking about mental health or having conversations of mental health is something that we should run from or avoid. One of the things that's tricky for me is I am a local pastor. And so to get a sense of the broader, church in the United States, I don't know if I can get a handle on that. But one of the things I will say is a frustration is when mental health issues are not dealt with well. And so that is my burden. And so I just feel like, man, I would love to see personally the church be able to jump into conversations about mental health without feeling like it's something we have to run from, without specifically tying it to a sin issue or poor character issue, is where I think a lot of, for me, some of the frustration is when we start talking about mental health as being the result of every time always being about sin or poor character. And so I think that leaves the church in a really rough place in these conversations, and it turns people who are in genuine pain, genuinely hurting, away from the church rather than towards the church.
I really appreciate that perspective, and I appreciate the fact that in a lot of ways you've seen the conversation evolve over the last few decades, and I think a lot of us are kind of coming out of where, and we're speaking really broad strokes,
Sure.
obviously different church communities handled things differently and probably better at times, even in the 80s and 90s and stuff. But I definitely think that collectively there was the feeling that the church stigmatized, as well as other parts of the culture. There was just stigmas that went along with mental health. I think the church, unfortunately, it seemed when I was growing up in middle school and high school, reflected that stigma on, if you're experiencing extended periods of negative mental health, must be sin at the root of it, which could be true, but it may not be true. But that conversation usually wasn't nuanced.
Right.
And now, with the rise, there's kind of like this rise of mental health awareness. And then I feel like from Phil's very limited perspective, okay, like I feel like we've moved from like awareness into proliferation, where, now it's incredibly commonplace conversation.
Sure.
When I was teaching, so I taught for 4 years in the public school system, and it was an amazing time. But I remember having this moment where, when I was growing up, I don't think I used depression or anxiety in my common vocabulary. Like it was, if we talked about, anxiety and depression, very few people interacted with those feelings and emotions. And then I'm looking at IEP files for students, half of which were being medicated for anxiety or depression, right? And those are just the ones that I knew about. And I remember having these moments of like, has this seesawed really far in the other direction? And then, and here's where kind of the crux is, have we just kind of flip-flopped our conversation and never really engaged in the nuance of mental health conversations in the church, right? Like, now we coming to a place in which everyone feels like they're an expert, and so we're still not having genuinely. It sounds like I'm asking a question, but I'm really phrasing it like a statement. Okay, and so I need to not do that. I feel like we still haven't engaged in nuance, and so my question to you would be: as individuals within the confines of the church, and we have a gospel ethic kind of mindset behind us, what does it look like to engage in, let's say somebody is in front of us who is expressing, deep needs emotionally? How do we engage in a conversation with them? What are some tips and tricks, I guess, which is lame to ask, but it's, in which we add nuance. We don't lose the gospel and think that everything needs to be medicated or go to a therapist, but how do we know when to recommend people properly to those resources? Do you get where I'm going with this?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a great question to ask, Phil. And I'm with you on this one, right? I think that in making the language of mental health really common, and we just kind of has sometimes lost some of the weight that comes when we talk about issues like anxiety and depression. So like now, because it's so common, how do we discern, right? What is a genuine issue versus just terminology to describe a set of feelings or emotions or a situation? And so I am with you on that. So I'll come at this. Can I start with just saying that what I hope we don't do, and then jump into what might be a way to tackle
where
it?
are our boundaries? Like, help us not fall into a pit, Frank. Okay.
Yeah. So I shared earlier that I think my challenge is when we view mental health as like statistically, I think it's 1 in 5 Americans, adult Americans today, struggle with a mental health issue. So it's 20%. Or so of Americans struggle with some type of mental health issue that's diagnosed. So this is not like a fringe issue. We're talking about 1 in 5. That means when you go to church, like 20% of the people you see in there has some type of, I've gotten a diagnosed mental health. I have a diagnosed mental health disorder. And so that doesn't mean they're all
lower than I thought it would be, to be honest.
Really? Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. Just because of my own anecdotal, like, engaging in my community. People that I've talked to, my personal connections is probably more than 1 in 5.
Oh my goodness. I think 1 in 5 is so high.
It is high.
And and if it seems like it's more, and it could be more than that. So Yeah, and so I think the challenge, if I'm looking at in church leaders in particular, right, and I feel like as I shared earlier, if the challenge in the past is the way we address mental health issues is we don't talk about it, that's not necessarily a healthy place to be,
Mm-hmm.
or we tie it specifically that when you're having a mental health disorder or issue, we tie it specifically to sin or poor character. That also creates
Mm-hmm.
a problem because when you do that, the only response then from the church's side is if that's what your struggle is, then your response should be to repent, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
we pray for you, and that that is how we work through the problem of mental health. And that's also, as you shared, I love the word you used earlier, unnuanced. And so I think there are
Yeah.
some challenges with that. And there's some, like, you know, the idea of, well, if you're feeling anxious, I mean, we have even the verses, right? Philippians 4, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer,
Yeah.
petition with thanksgiving, present. So God's word even says if you're feeling anxious, then you should just go ahead and pray and God's peace will fill you. And if you don't experience in that, then you're either lacking in faith or that, that you need to have more faith, or there's
In
something
essence, you're
about
doing
sin or
something wrong.
correct. You're still
Yeah.
the problem. And I
Yeah.
just think that's a real challenge, right? And yet we also want to honor what the scriptures say. And I think
Yeah.
the way for me, I kind of, if you want to work through like a shortcut or
Yeah.
a way to work through it, I think I generally encourage, and what we train in our church is to look for two ideas: symptoms and severity. And the idea behind those is symptoms is saying it's a very medical view on mental health, right? It's like, okay, well, what is going on and how bad is it are basically the ideas. And
Okay.
so because it matters. And so maybe I'll use a medical analogy to kind of help how this fits for mental health too. So if someone comes up, you have a friend come up to you and say, man, my leg really hurts. And you know that they just had an intense CrossFit workout the other day and they're recovering. You
Yeah.
probably laugh at them and say, dude, just stretch it out, maybe take some ibuprofen and you'll be fine,
Eat a
right?
banana, get the
Yeah,
potassium, you'll be fine.
exactly. Get your
Yeah.
potassium running, something.
Yeah.
But then maybe they tell you, yeah, well, what happened was I was playing football, someone landed on it wrong, and I heard a crack. Then the
Yeah.
symptom is still your leg hurts, but the severity issue is, oh, well, that's different. Now you should go see a doctor. Maybe something was
Yeah.
broken, you did some damage. Or if you heard the friend say, well, I was in a car accident and now I'm in the hospital and my legs don't move, I can't feel my feet. That's also a very different issue. Does that make sense? The symptom
It
might be
does.
the same, my leg hurts, but the severity
Yep.
changes how we respond to it.
Yeah, I'm
And I
tracking with that.
think, yeah, so I would say the same, similar is how I would look at mental health issues as well, right? That when someone uses a specific word, again, because it's become commonplace, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling anxious. I think as Christian leaders, what I would hope we do is instead of saying, oh, I'm assuming I know what that means, and therefore I apply
Mm,
a specific response, I take the time to listen and get a sense of, well, when you say that, what does it really mean and how bad is it? And allowing some of that to determine our response.
it's so interesting. I think the older I'm getting and the longer I'm walking with Jesus, like I'm noticing how often things generally come back to like the basics. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel
Yeah.
like in sports, you hear about this that like no matter how long you've been playing basketball, you still practice the basics.
Yeah.
And essentially, what you're saying is step one is be curious and listen. Be slow to
Yes.
speak and
Mm-hmm.
quick to listen and quick to allow that person the space, no matter what the issue is. But especially if they're saying, so if me and you were talking and I said, Frank, I'm just feeling depressed, that opens up a wide range of what that could be, a severity experience,
Right.
right? And so what you're saying is that your goal would be to listen to me, ask questions. What do you mean by that? What's good?
Yes.
And to give me some space. And then in that process, you would be just mentally and prayerfully in your mind saying like how severe is this, and what would be the way to love on Phil and serve Phil in this way? Am I kind of on track here?
Yeah, and I'd say symptoms is also part of it, right? So when you
Okay.
say depressed, tell me a bit more about what that means. Is it a
Mm-hmm.
sadness issue? Is it a hopelessness issue? Is it like just being able to find out more of when they're using that word, what does it mean for them? So that is the symptom part. Like, tell me more what that feels like for you, and then how bad is it? Yeah, those two together should kind of give us, could help shape and define our response a bit.
And this
So,
is really helpful. One of the things that comes to my mind as you're speaking, and I could see it as a potential issue, depending on the individual you're discussing, is
mhm,
where I'm totally tracking with the analogy, and I think the analogy actually works really well.
sure.
Physical pain and understanding symptoms and severity. The area in which there's not always a one-to-one correlation is there is there's arguably a level of subjectivity when it comes to the severity of something,
Yeah,
mental health related. And,
correct.
um, so me and you could go through the same factors. You could say you're anxious. I could say I'm anxious, but we could have two very different levels of anxiety, despite the fact that all of the
Sure,
factors that led. You going with this? So
I do.
I guess we are. It feels like living in a culture where if someone says, "No, it's just so bad," and I need medication to move through this, which is a very real. Like I've experienced, hearing that I should say, from individuals in my life, friends, family, and even students I taught, that were just like, "No, I can't." Um, I guess my question comes. Well, I'll get to my question in a moment. So here's my concern.
Yeah.
My
Okay.
concern is, um, so we look at symptoms and severity. We're
Right.
trying to understand how to serve this person in front of us. We're
Yes.
operating though in a bigger culture,
Hmm.
and this larger culture. And I think it's safe to say that generally the larger culture does not believe that Jesus can heal, that there's power in the gospel and in our testimony, and that the Lord can do miraculous works of healing, physical and mental. Um, and nor do I think the culture needs to conform to that. But what I do pray is that the church still holds to that. So how does a church like reconcile having amazing resources in our culture to
Sure.
help resolve mental health, while also having a gospel that should be renewing our mind and bringing about that healing? And I think this is a tension that I struggle with. I've struggled with my own personal life. I struggle with, if I counsel this person into counseling, am I
Yeah.
helping them, or am I telling them that Jesus isn't enough here? And I don't know what to do to serve these people. And so help me out with, how would you gauge um, how to get somebody the right resources, but not lead them away from the gospel in the process?
Sure. Absolutely. Um, Gosh, that's not a very simple question you're asking though. So,
No, it's
there's a
probably
lot of
got no
different
clean
layers.
answer, honestly. So, I'm really just taking all of my baggage right now and just dumping it in front of you, Frank, and saying, "Could you just
Yeah.
sort through this for me real quick?" Like that'd be great.
Okay. Well, let's how about we take it a bit piece by piece. So one of the
Yeah.
things that I think is a bit unique in how I pastor is I do specifically in this arena. I do weave together the clinical and biblical. I think that they're not
Okay.
mutually exclusive ideas; they're a bit woven, and
Mhm.
so I'll try to parse through that, bringing some of both perspectives into this, if that's okay. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
from the clinical perspective, I'll say that when we talk about, and we'll stick with something relatively understandable and common, like anxiety and depression,
Okay.
part of the diagnostic in whether or not it is a feeling or an emotional state versus a mental health disorder there is a bit of relativity that's built into it, right? It's to the
Mm.
degree to which it disrupts your life functioning. If it
Mm.
is the symptoms and it's so severe, right? If the symptoms fit, that puts it in a category. And the severity is it is disrupting my ability to live a normal life. That is when it crosses the line from a problem to a mental health disorder issue, right? And again, there's parallels with the physical health too, right? If my leg hurts, how badly does it disrupt your life? But for mental health issues, that is one of the indicators of whether or not it crosses that line. And so I do think that tying it to your question earlier, like how do we parse? I think one of the things responsible leaders do is they're able to define the boundaries of their expertise, right? Their limits of
Mm.
care. And so when you're talking with someone who has gone beyond your limits of care, like their symptoms are so
Mm.
severe that it's like, this is beyond what I am capable of caring for. I think every responsible leader needs to know where their limits are and don't cross them. And to be able, that's, I think, where how you differentiate what is still within the sphere of how I care for them versus when they need to be referred to some expert.
Okay. So for the record, I fully submit to that. I'm fully
Gotcha.
on board with that. But I can hear somebody asking the question. So imagine somebody else listening to this podcast. I feel
Yeah,
like there's a natural response, right? You got a pastor, they're listening, and they're saying, but Frank, there's nothing outside the limit of what Jesus can do,
sure.
right? And he used these fishermen and he used these individuals for these great works of healing and miracles and all these kind of things. And we see this in the book of Acts, and we see that, like, Frank, should I really be limiting myself? Isn't that, in this case, limiting what the Lord can do in someone's life? So I'm tracking with you and I agree with you, but how would you respond to someone, and which I
Yeah,
think is a pretty logical kind of conclusion when reading the Bible, right? And coming away with that. So help me navigate that.
sure. I'm going to do the pastor thing and I'll bring it to a
Yeah.
verse in a second. But before I do, I I want to respect and respond to that. And I want to say that
Yeah.
whatever responses we give is not in any way, shape, or form designed to make God small. I
Mm.
don't think we're capable of that. God is
Yeah,
who
yeah.
he is. Um, but then my question would be, why specifically would we apply that to the discipline of mental health and not to other
Mm.
disciplines? Because that's true
Mm.
of physical health as well, right?
Yeah.
Why would we respond? Are we going to a doctor to heal cancer or to fix a broken leg? Is that not a
Yeah.
limitation of our faith? As a matter of fact, when you read the New
Mm.
Testament and Jesus
Mm.
healing, most of them had to do with physical ailments, not mental health ones.
Yeah.
And do we not believe Jesus is capable? Same with why would we go to any professional then, right?
Yeah.
Financial professionals. Not the scriptures have enough truth in them that why would we ever need a financial advisor? Why would we not ever need, I think my question isn't that there isn't a good answer. I think across the
Yeah.
board, we do not want our people to turn to idolatry versus seeking the Lord first, right? But my gut reaction when I hear you say that is, why would that specifically or uniquely be applied to mental health and not applied to
Yeah.
other disciplines? Because it can be fairly asked of many other disciplines and arenas of life as well, not just mental health. And for me, I'm like, I
Mm.
don't like that mental health gets picked out and says, well, if you go into seek professional care
Mm.
in mental health, it's a lack of faith. But if you get it professional help in other arenas, that's not necessarily lack of faith.
Yeah.
It's, that's where that
That's
comes
such a
in.
good point. For example, I think just using the physical health analogy, right?
Hmm.
Although we are aware of maybe fringe groups that would
Sure.
reject, but
Yeah.
mainstream, generally speaking, we acknowledge that there's nothing sinful about, I have a cold, I use medication,
Right.
or, my kid. I have four boys, right? So they may have hurt themselves once or twice, and I take them to
Yeah.
the doctor, and we still think that's a good godly thing, and I
Sure.
do, and I think this is actually something really important to mention. I actually do two things when there's physical harm. So if my kid gets really hurt, I'm going to call the ambulance or put them in a car and take them to the hospital. And then when it's an appropriate time, I'm going to pick up my phone and I'm going to text my brothers in Christ who are going to pray
Mm.
for me. And I
Yeah.
might
That's
reach out to my pastor and ask him to come to the hospital and pray and anoint with oil. Like I'm actually not going to choose one. I'm
correct.
going to do both. Would you say that's like actually a good analogy for thinking about how we would approach mental health as well?
Yeah, I do think so. I think that we're not in saying that we choose to have professional care as an option, eliminating God from the equation at all. It's not that binary, right? It doesn't have to
Mm-hmm.
be.
Mm.
And so I do think then my concern more of is not whether we're choosing the option of potentially having professional care, meaning that we have to take God off the table, right? I think if they can both exist side by side, then for me, when I'm thinking about mental health in the church. And if all the options, in a sense, are all these options are on the table, then for me, it's like, well, then as Christians, I think the way we posture ourselves in caring is what's really important. And that kind of takes me
Mm.
to the verse I want. I put it on my phone earlier, so I wouldn't have to search for it. But Galatians chapter 6 is one of the passages that I like on this. And there's numerous passages that could tie very well to mental health, but I like this one
Okay.
because it helps define some of the things I shared earlier, right? Limits. It says in Galatians 6 chapter 2, I'm reading New Living Translation, share one another's burdens, and in this way, obey the law of Christ. If you think you're too important to help someone, you're only fooling yourself. You're not that important. And so what I love
Mm.
about these passages, it actually shares in these passages not only the charge, but identifies two pitfalls or two dangers to avoid, right? One is don't think of yourself as being too good to help. I think that is a responsibility we have, is to
Yeah.
be helping. We live in community. God has placed us in community for a reason. And part of what community does is we share one another's burdens. That is how we obey the law of Christ. None of
Mm.
us are independent and stand alone, and none of us are too good to help. And then the other part of this too is avoid taking on too important a role in your helping, right? To think that, well, I am God, I am here to rescue you, to save you, to fix all
Mhm.
of your problems. I think that's another pitfall here, right? If you think, and I think that's where, like when I'm going through this passage, I'm like, okay, it's not a perfect fit, but man, I like the emphasis that, because if we are honoring this, we avoid the two and specifically in mental health, the two dangers that I do feel like are a bit of a concern to me, right? One is
Mhm.
minimizing the problem and dismissing it and saying, oh, you're feeling anxious. It's not that big a deal. You're really not anxious. It's an
Yeah.
issue of faith, and you just need to have bigger faith. You need to pray more. And so we
Yeah.
make the issue small. And a lot of times we do that because I don't know what to do with this, and I'd rather just push it away. So if I make it small enough and give you something to do, then I can push it away. And it also avoids the other pitfall, is where we come in and we feel like we have to bear the responsibility of making you right. And with that, right, that's what happens when we take professional care or other options off the table. Is like, well, now I have to be the one that fixes you. I'll be your accountability partner. I'll be
Mhm.
praying for you every time you're having an anxious thought or a panic attack or whatever. You call me, and I become that overly important part. And that's also not an appropriate
Is that what's
place to be.
is that what we call codependence, when you essentially need to be the person who's needed to fix the problem?
It
Is
could
that
become codependence, right?
okay?
Codependence is, yeah, that we have an unhealthy relationship where
Clearly,
I
I'm
am
educated
becoming
on
part of
this,
the
but
problem. Yeah,
I've read an
yeah, that's
article.
certainly,
Uh,
yeah. So I don't know if that helps. Just kind of
it
posturing is just
does.
understand that appropriate care and being a helper, a godly helper, means we come alongside, we understand that we can care for, but God is the curer, and that we have a
Mm.
role to play, but we have that role in a right understanding of that role. It's not to do nothing, but it's also not to do what only God, or even in some cases professionals, have a place to take on.
This is really helpful. I have one more kind of like, it's probably an axe to grind. I'd like to call it something else.
Okay,
But honesty is important to me. So maybe it's an axe to grind.
sure.
I don't know. But it's something I'm processing through. And so it kind of comes in the sense that, now that, again, and I think in a lot of good ways, we had this movement towards mental health awareness. And we've moved into mental health proliferation.
Hmm.
And, unfortunately or fortunately, at times, depends. I feel like the church oftentimes mirrors the culture. I wish the church did a better job of shaping it, but I think sometimes
Sure.
it internalizes it. And so, I'm listening to Christian artists, reading Christian books. I feel like I can't listen to, a pastor's conference without talking about burnout. I feel like I can't listen to a
Gotcha.
new album talking, that isn't emphasizing that artist's struggle with depression. And there's this thing that's been in the back of my mind. And I don't know if it's honestly from the Lord or if it's like from my own axe to grind.
Sure.
And it's essentially this idea of like, aren't Christians supposed to be moving imperfectly? Imperfectly, it's a sanctification part. But aren't we supposed to be a healed people? Like, I'm wondering if the church collectively looks much healthier than the society around us, right? So I think I kind of grew up, and I think it's a good thing that the church has had moments of like kind of a healthy level of embarrassment when like our divorce rates don't look any different than the world outside the church.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
we acknowledge that like there should be a difference, right? Like there should be a difference of people who are committed
Yeah.
followers to Jesus having generally healthier marriages. It does not mean we need to be throwing condemnation for people who get divorced, but it also means that we should be asking ourselves the question, like, why is there no difference here? Right? Like
Gotcha.
it should still be a sign to us as church leaders to say, like, I just feel like there's so my and I don't have any firm data to say whether or not mental health is
Sure.
similar, but culturally, it feels like the church is not posturing itself as, hey, we are broken too, but we're moving towards healing,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that's something that you've felt, if you've seen. This might be a new thought for you, or if you're like, hey, Phil, I don't think that's an accurate perspective. Like this is something I'm thinking about and processing through. Aren't Christians supposed to be people on the road to healing and able to say to the world, like, hey, I know the Savior. You were not
Gotcha.
promised healing, but like this tends to
Sure.
be a part of the whole walking with Jesus thing. Uh, that's what I've been thinking about, Frank, and I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. I appreciate that you are. So is your question more along the lines of if we are a sanctified people, why are we not looking more healed than we are? Or
Yes.
is your question more of why are the broken not coming to us?
I I think those two questions play into one another, but I would say my question is the former, the first idea, right? Aren't we supposed to look more healed? And I'm nervous to say that because I don't want to sound judgmental for people who are struggling. I've
Sure.
struggled with anxiety at times for sure. I've had bouts where I was pretty confident I was clinically depressed. Like I've had those moments in times of my life, and so I have empathy. My question though is, but aren't we supposed to be people who are moving towards healing? And I feels like we're
Yeah.
looking like the rest of the world. So thank you I think you phrased that question really well.
Gotcha. Yeah. I I don't know how to answer specifically the question of as Christians who are sanctified, becoming conformed in the image of Christ, why are we not looking more healthier um, as mental health wise, right, than the rest of the
Mm-hmm.
world does? Because I don't know if we are or not. Like as you
Yeah.
were sharing earlier, I don't know if there's any way to measure that.
Yeah.
But I can say a couple of things to that, right? I think one's like my frustration, and the other side is my hope. The frustration
Mm.
side says that I wonder sometimes if the reason why we are not is because the church has not traditionally been a safe place to
Mm.
wrestle with mental health issues and to
Mm-hmm.
frame it biblically, as well as allowing for clinical space in there too. And so if our people are not able to go through a process of confession and being able
Mm.
to share burdens with one another, then of course we're going to be somewhat hindered in, allowing, becoming more Christ-like if the people of
Mm.
Christ are not allowing for that healing to happen, right? Or we're shortcutting that or circumventing that
Yeah.
by being dismissive of it. So I think that's one part that's my pessimistic side would say, "Ooh, I wonder if that's
Yeah.
probably what is there." But I also share that I am also hopeful, and I do believe that those in the church who are honestly wrestling with this alongside believers who have a right posture about mental health, I do believe that church gives hope that the world does not have.
Mm.
Because like when we talk about mental health, what does the world really have to offer? The world has to offer medication, yoga, right?
Yeah.
And acupuncture. I mean, like, what does the church? What does the world really have to offer? The world really doesn't have to offer much at all, right? Management of pain, but not healing.
Mm.
The church, right? God gives a very different. God offers hope and healing, and the hope, even if you don't experience that to the full here, you will someday, right? God
Mm.
offers a lot more hope and a future hope and a present hope, I believe, that the world does not. And so I think in that sense, being a Christian who was wrestling with mental health challenges with the perspective of that we are not alone, right? That we have God's Holy Spirit coming alongside us, right? That even in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for God is with me. And that we
Mm.
have the hope of eternity. Christians are, in all reality, in a better place
Yeah.
struggling with mental health issues than you would be without Christ.
Yeah.
And so I firmly believe that to be true. I believe the church has the
Amen.
opportunity to be much more redemptive in this area than we are, because we offer, not we offer, God offers a hope that the world cannot in any way, shape, or form offer. But that is
Mm.
not something that we talk a lot about, because I don't know if it's awkward, uncomfortable, or making promises. I don't know what that looks like for me, but I do believe we
Oh
have
man.
it by the grace
I
of God.
am I'm incredibly grateful that you said that. It's actually really encouraging to me, and I think it redirects me really well. I would say that, and maybe this is the last bit of advice for this particular episode, but what you just mentioned, I think there's a lot of people nodding, like yes, like so. My lived experience would be that I've encountered a lot of the similar struggles that I know others have encountered, and some really tough lived experiences. But for me, I'll use this. I've heard people talk when going through their counseling or therapy, talk about coming to peace with themselves,
Mm,
and I've just never. I've I've sought to come to peace in the Lord, and not. My focus was never on finding peace with myself. Does that make sense? Like it was like the
sure.
focus was on the Lord.
Correct.
And so for me, like this was stuff that like was really valuable, like looking to Christ, looking to the scriptures for healing as a part of my process. The
Yeah.
primary part of my process, spiritual disciplines like prayer and fasting and Sabbath, have all been major parts of creating a mentally healthy, Phil Snyder, right? That
Yes.
that that has got me through deep moments of grief and loss and pain and disillusionment and struggle and all the things. I'm nervous to share some of those at times because I feel like I don't want to go to the seesaw that I think culturally we're at in the early 2000s and 90s, which is when I share with you, you say that you're struggling with anxiety. I'm like, man, I really have also struggled with anxiety. And I noticed that when I was anxious, it was because my thoughts really were dwelt on me. And so for me, like as I overcame, not really I overcame anxiety. I just actually really cast my burdens on him. And that was a slow process, and it took time, and it took prayer and fasting and a long process. I don't want to make it trite, but I also want to be clear that that's where I feel like the answer is. But I feel like if I
Yeah.
do that, then I could dissuade someone from getting the support that they need, because maybe they need counseling in a way that I didn't. I
Sure.
also, there could be a chemical imbalance going on that I didn't experience, or maybe I was experiencing and I was miraculously healed. And I have no idea if the Lord's healing story is the same for them as it is for me. So I'm actually nervous, which I'm really ashamed to say, but it's true, it's honest. I'm sometimes nervous to share my testimony in case it makes people feel like I'm doing what the church used to do, which was just pray more. Uh,
Gotcha.
do you get where I'm going with that? Like,
Yes.
yeah. Help me. How do
Yeah.
how do I communicate that nuance in a way that's helpful?
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you right, and you correct me
Hmm.
if I'm not, you're basically, what you're sharing is, I have gone through pain, and I have
Hmm.
gone through hurt, and I've gone through anxiety and worry. And the fact that I have found healing and hope and strength in the Lord without having to go through the
Hmm.
counseling route makes me feel like my story can't be applied to other people's circumstances. And so I'm afraid to share it, because I'm worried that they'll interpret what I'm saying is, you don't need all of the other stuff in
Yes.
order to have
You were
healing. Is that
really
what
good at
you're?
this question repeating thing, by the way. Like, this is really good. Usually I'm good at
Yeah,
this. Like,
thanks.
you're crushing it today. So, yes, you nailed it. Like, and so I've been
Yeah,
hesitant in a way that I don't think has been honoring to the Lord.
yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I would say, as long as you're not, in sharing your story, saying that this is the only story that can fit? Is this the only solution that you can have? I think then I'd say, man, feel free to share your story, right? I think that man, one of the things I remember, and this isn't a direct application, but I remember one of the quotes I love most from Ravi Zacharias, and he shared about Jesus, and he said that if we believe that Jesus Christ came to make bad people good, you have misunderstood the gospel entirely.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ did not come to make bad people good. He came to make dead people live, right? And that's what Jesus says. I've come that you might have life and life abundant. And part of that life abundant is that the hope that we have in him, not only in the life to come, but in this one as well, right? And that we have been given a community of believers. We've been given God's Holy Spirit to empower us to to be able to do all the things that he has called us to do, to experience his kingdom come, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I think we have to learn as Christians that to be able to say that, and also to be able to say that in this life, right, while we're going through the messiness of life, and while we've been damaged by some of the challenges of living life, and some of the damage that some of the people closest to us have inflicted upon us, that means we have the confidence knowing God's Holy Spirit comes alongside us, but we can also benefit from the expertise that comes from counseling as well, to kind of help us to navigate those places that we get stuck, and that's okay, right? And I feel like we have no problem saying that in other arenas. So same with financially, right? Yeah, financially understood. You guys have been given the truth of Scripture to handle and manage your finances well, and you're doing a great job. But there's no harm in getting some expertise to be able to help you figure out ways to do that more effectively. Physical pain, on and on. What I get frustrated by is to take mental health and separate it from all the others and say this, in this arena alone, when you go outside and ask for expertise to come in and help, that it's inappropriate when it's appropriate in multiple other arenas. That's the part that for me, I want to push against.
This reminds me, and it's a book we've talked about before on the podcast, Misreading Scripture Through Western Eyes by Dr. Richards and Dr. O'Brien. And we were talking about it before we started recording as well. But it was this book that was really influential in part because it opened me up to the fact that oftentimes the Hebrew writers of the Old and New Testament just didn't approach things in a Western mindset. And one of those crucial elements was the fact that two things can be true at the same time, which is not generally a Western perspective, but is very, very Eastern and very Hebraic. We see this in the Trinity. What God is 3 in 1. So God's 3, yes. God's 1, yes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's a mystery. Yeah, and we're okay with that mystery. And same thing with Jesus, right? He's fully God and he's fully man, and we're comfortable with that because we believe it to be true and we believe it to be beyond our current reckoning. And so I think the question becomes, does God desire to heal his people through the Holy Spirit and through the Word and through the community and through the church? Yes. Does he also desire to heal people through the sciences that have kind of come around as people have studied us humans, right? Like as people have studied God's creation and come away with conclusions about how to best serve and meet the needs of the human mind. Yes, that too.
Yeah.
And I think the church, I'm going to repeat what I feel like I'm pulling away, and then you tell me if I'm coming away with the right things. The church doesn't need to be afraid of mental health counseling and therapy and resources. Right. We still have the supreme hope in the cross and in the work that Christ has done there, and in the ecclesiastical church that the Lord is now. He calls us his temple, and we are growing into this amazing kingdom that he's establishing here on earth.
Yes.
And it's okay to be a church leader and to say, I need to listen, I need to be cautious, and I need to be wise and discerning and slow. And it's okay to say, I'm humble enough to know I actually don't know how to support you. I'm going to continue to pray for you. I might fast for you. I may, I encourage you to do the same. But here's also a local resource of mental health counselors who will point you to Christ as they also walk you through a more educated process than I can. And that's
Yeah.
okay. And that's healthy.
Yes. Absolutely. I think that was phrased really, really well, right? I think part of responsible and loving spiritual shepherding is to be able to come alongside and say, this is what God has given us,
Mm,
our arena of expertise to be able to provide for you. And there are times when going through life, there are things that
mm,
fall a bit outside of our
right.
limits of care. And when spirit responsible shepherding says that when you fall beyond that, right, then we're going to pull in what care is necessary to make sure that you get what you need. And then, we're going to come
Yeah.
alongside you and not abandon you in this.
Frank, thanks for coming alongside me in this
Oh,
conversation.
yeah. Happy to. Ditto.
I have been trying, and I'm still going to continue the wrestle, I'm sure, to some extent, but this brings a lot of peace and comfort to me, just to know that a lot of my wrestling has been valid, but also I think
Yeah.
I might have been overthinking some things, and it's kind of nice to vocalize them and process them, get them out in the air, and work through them. So thank you so much for being on the podcast with us,
Yeah. Thank you,
and
Phil.
thank you so much for the work that you're doing in your home church and church
Mm.
community.
Thank you so much. And ditto, my friend. I very much appreciate this time. I appreciate your thoughtfulness. And I'm very grateful for the conversation.
Thank you all for joining Frank and myself on today's episode of the Living Room Disciple podcast. I'm praying that the conversation between Frank and myself was a blessing to you. And I can say for me, it's helped give me some clarity and some wisdom with how we as individuals within the church should be engaging with our culture and people specifically in our congregations who are struggling with issues related to mental health. So let's engage in a way that's nuanced and wise, like Frank counseled us today. For the record, if you haven't checked us out yet online, you can go to livingroomdisciple.com to find out more about our show, how to support us on Patreon. Huge shout out to Anissa Leib for all the production work, to Daniel Ramirez for the music for today, and as always, to Eric Church for making sure this podcast gets in your ears. Thank you all for joining us today on the Living Room Disciple podcast, where discipleship finds a home.